Welcome to the Spiritual Right podcast. Today, we're going to be talking about a very dark subject. We're going to be talking about evil, what it is, and what we could do about it. So, I'll just jump right in. I think evil is something that's irredeemably bad, something that's irredeemably bad for the individual that suffers it. So, if something really bad happens to you and it's made up for later, that's not evil. Evil is something that you just cannot make up for, or what's something that isn't made up for in your life, something that leaves you feeling in despair, and it's not something that's necessarily done by another person. I think evil is inherent in nature. This has always driven me crazy. Just the fact that, um, like nature uses disease and predation as a way to control population. So many animals are born, like so many babies are born every month to mammals who experience pain and suffering. And then they die. They die in agony. And that's just the design. That's just the way it is. There's nothing you could do about it. And humans used to go through this all the time up until very recently. So mothers would carry their babies for 9 months and go through the agony of birth and dealing with an infant and bond. And it's the strongest bond there is between a mother and a child. And then they would lose the child and they would go through this over and over again. And that was part of the design. So, I mean, it was very good that they had a metaphysical system that made sense of that. So, if they were Christians, they believed that the baby would go to heaven and they would see it again. They would be reunited. They thought they believed there was meaning in their suffering. If they were Buddhists, they believed that this was the baby's karma, this was their karma. They might have a better lot in a different life if they dealt with it well. But for us today, who are, reluctant materialists, we don't really have that, even though we still have a lot of suffering, although maybe not as much as in the past. So it's very difficult to deal with it and to know how to accept the really terrible things that happen to you if you don't believe that there is an afterlife. It doesn't feel like suffering has any meaning. But even if it does have meaning, so even if you do believe in reincarnation, like if you're a Buddhist, that still presents a problem with evil because, okay, so Buddhists, they don't believe that generating anger or hatred is good for the individual. I mean, it obviously isn't in a way. Like it makes us feel really bad, but sometimes it seems to be necessary. So when you're fighting the culture war, for instance, or any other kind of war, especially a physical war, obviously, you need to have anger and hatred toward your enemy. You want to crush them. But that kind of attitude will lead to a bad rebirth and also bad karma for you in this life. So it doesn't seem like that's the right attitude from a Buddhist point of view. Like I remember this one sutta that I read about this anthropomorphic monkey that was helping a traveler on his way that was lost in the forest. And when they went to sleep, the traveler tried to kill the monkey and eat it. The monkey woke up and got away, and he wanted to, leave the traveler, but he decided that it was better to continue helping the traveler find his way. Otherwise, he would lose the merit that he had gained. So that kind of attitude doesn't seem to really help us when dealing with evil people when we really want to win a war, like we're in a culture war, for instance. I don't really have any solution to this problem. I'm just throwing it out there and seeing what other people think of it. But I'll pass the mic on to others who want to speak.
Yeah, that was a great intro, and I think you really hit all the different aspects of it. I mean, the topic the aspect that I struggle with is kind of going from okay, there's evil that people actually like maliciously want to hurt other people. There's things that happen that are just really bad for pretty much no reason, and then between that and the fact of there being kind of no good and evil, everything being God, and that it's kind of like some sort of play of consciousness, and therefore there's nothing to be done about it, and it's all kind of fine. It's just part of like the world functioning, and that any sort of view of something really being ultimately bad is just false because it would all be kind of God and some sort of universal play. And I think that this is like the two things that really I kind of go between these two different points. I thought it was really interesting too when you were talking about war, because I mean, as someone that's done a lot of fighting and martial arts, and I don't know, learn how to channel maybe the darker side of myself for different purposes. It's I don't know. Sometimes I think it's just two sides of the same coin. And it's kind of um, irrelevant in a sense that certain situations require certain energies, and some of them are very intense and brutal and selfish sometimes, but it's like there's sometimes maybe even an appropriate situation to bring that up, and that if you basically are detached about it, then you can kind of almost, how do you say, like just be, how do I word this, You can basically just kind of be free despite having maybe negative emotional states, and that kind of works as a non-dual way to function in the world. Um, but yeah, that's my 2 cents. You guys wanna what do you guys got?
I can give it a shot. I assume first it's good to just clarify definitions. Like in the shorts when I was answering questions, I just went with a more ethical definition of evil. Like I went with Schopenhauer's definition, where Schopenhauer is saying that um I mean evil isn't just bad, evil isn't just unpleasant, and it's like an ethical state. And Schopenhauer is saying that just some ruthless, selfish person who's willing to just trample anyone who gets in his way is not evil. He's just ruthless and selfish. Whereas an actually evil person like delights in the suffering of others. So there's that. I mean, we can discuss the broader just evil as just badness or like unredeemable unpleasantness or something. But yeah, I think like in our response to evil, then yeah, I think we should probably also address what do you do with a person who is just really just hates you and wants to hurt you? What is the appropriate response? And in Buddhism, also in Christianity, it's turn the other cheek essentially. You don't add any negativity to the interaction, or you add as little as possible. And it reminds me of this movie I saw this not very long ago, The Men Who Stare at Goats, something like that, where
Mm,
that was like the strategy of this one guy who was one of the adepts in this secret military group that were trying to use like psychic powers as a way of um, like accomplishing military goals. And he was saying that if you got someone who wants to kill you, for example, you just almost go blank. You just kind of go completely neutral and just don't feed into the situation at all. And you can defuse matters. Like if someone's motivated by rage or something and you're just not contributing to that, you're just like this sink that the energy just kind of comes into and just disappears. Then I mean that can really defuse a situation a lot. And in a way it's sort of like turning the other cheek, or like the Buddhist just forgiveness, patience, acceptance kind of a thing. But with regard to just badness in general, I've long been of the opinion that just as an animal, the human animal, we just take the less pleasant half of our experiences and call that bad, and take the more pleasant experiences and call those good. And if you got rid of the bottom half somehow, you got rid of all the stuff you consider to be bad, all it would do is that the bar would just shift, and the lower half of what you used to be considered good would now be considered bad. It's
mm,
just sort of the balance of positive and negative in the universe. It's more of a Taoist idea than a Buddhist one.
mm,
But yeah, it's what you were saying, humble stature, about really at one level, it's just like going from like a Hinduistic um, approach. I mean, it's all God. It's all just manifestations of God. Even the dark stuff is God.
mhm,
And so it's in a way it's sort of like reprogramming yourself how you interpret things as good or bad. Is more of the issue, at least from a contemplative approach like Buddhism, than what practical approach do you adopt towards unpleasantness or that sort of thing. Like in Buddhism, you're supposed to even seek out unpleasantness just so you can get practice at accepting it. That's what asceticism is all about,
mhm,
where you're just like willfully, intentionally confronting unpleasantness, contemplating rotting corpses and this sort of thing,
mhm,
as a way of learning equanimity. Because if you can have equanimity when bad stuff is happening, you can have equanimity pretty much all the time.
mm.
Well, I mean, maybe having equanimity when pleasant stuff is going on may be difficult too, but that's a whole different approach, I think.
I mean, I do like the idea that you have to be conscious to be evil, that you have to actually understand who you are and what you're doing and actually intentionally want to hurt other people, as being like the big distinction between good and evil. And the other stuff is just bad and good. I think that works for me.
Yeah, I mean, there's it's sort of like a difference between just badness or evil and unpleasantness or something like that. Like an earthquake that causes all kinds of suffering, it just flattens the city. I mean, in one sense, you can call it evil, but in another sense, it's just ethically neutral because the earthquake has had no malevolent like intent, or like a
Mhm,
disease, the bubonic plague, the bacterium that caused the bubonic plague. It wasn't, I mean, it was really icky. It killed off a third of the world's population approximately, but still, I mean, it wasn't like malevolent in the sense of just wanting to make bad things happen.
mhm.
So yeah, I think it would be good to kind of bear in mind kind of both sides of the issue, like the broad interpretation and the narrow one.
Well, one of the utility. Oh yeah, jump in.
Well, in either case, it seems like when something is extreme enough, it would take a I mean, it would be you have to be a saint to be able to deal with, somebody that really hates you and wants to destroy you when you can't get away from that person, to not react to that person, to not have like a negative reaction, but to be the sink of the sort that you're talking about. I mean, it seems like you have to go and become a monk and meditate for 30 years. Maybe then you would have that capacity and maybe you still wouldn't. But for, a normal person living a normal life, I mean, how is it helpful? They just can't do that. That the bar is just too high, I think.
I mean, all this seems
Yeah,
to take is
well,
conviction.
It takes conviction.
Yeah, I mean, I think that if you have a philosophy and you believe in it enough, whether it's like, okay, when this happens, that you understand that, that they're basically it's the best they can do, or they're not really trying to harm you, or they don't understand, or like what do you call it? Like the fact they don't know any better to some
That's
extent, and
not
you
very
really believe
useful,
that.
I think, actually. I have struggled with that quite a bit. So yeah, I mean, you could say that like this person doesn't know any better. You could say that so long as you're not having to be in contact with them all the time. You could like tell yourself that story and that could make you feel good and you could move on. But if you're having to be in contact with that person all the time, you can't treat them as though they're not responsible for their behavior. That will only encourage them to be even worse because you want them to take responsibility, right?
I
So
don't think not necessarily. I don't think you have to have them take responsibility. I feel like that's like pushing a more moralistic approach on somebody. Like you could basically just say, okay, well, this person, like kind of like with family members. I think family members are a good example. So you have a brother or sister that's really just not good. They're doing things that they shouldn't be doing, and they're abusive or whatever, right? So I mean, you could basically say, okay, well, I love this person. I understand that what they're doing isn't good, and just minimize your time around them. And if they act like that, you act in a way in which you can basically stand your ground and say, okay, well, you shouldn't be doing that. That's not good. And then you keep your distance, and then just function in that way, but it's all kind of more impersonal. Um, but I think it is like there's no easy because everything is going to be automatic, right? So to whatever degree you're attached to that certain outcome or to that person, I mean, you're basically going to be at the whim of whatever they do because your reaction is going to be automatic. So you have to start developing a belief about um, how to look at them. But I mean, one other point though, on the same topic is just that I remember when I was listening to something, it was like a Jordan Peterson thing. He was talking about how a lot of people that go in the military don't have a philosophy of evil and basically end up getting traumatized because of it because they run up against things that are like basically horrors of war. And because there's no philosophy of how there could be so much suffering or so much pain, it basically breaks them. And they come back and they just, end up going into drugs or whatever it is to just try to, I guess, cope with a world that is more evil, you could say, than they were originally aware. I feel like that's another good point on this.
yeah, yeah, this is what he talks about, right? Because there's a lot of people who are very naive, and that's sort of our culture is like that. There's a lot of naivete, especially in the spiritual circles, which is why I really don't
Hmm.
like them. There's a tendency to believe that everybody has good intentions, and when they're
Yeah.
acting badly toward you, oh, they have good intentions or something or other. Tell some
Hmm.
story, but it's a lot of
Yeah.
BS. I mean, I really I find that to be very unhelpful. Again, it could only be helpful if you get away from that person and then you're telling yourself this story to make yourself feel better. But if you're having to be in contact with them, like again, obviously, if it's a family member and you're having to be in contact with them, uh, believing you can't. I mean, believing they actually have good intentions when they don't. Wow, you're really digging your own grave. Things are, like you can't fool yourself like that. Bad things are going to happen. They're going to screw you over. And
Yeah, for
also
sure.
believing that they're not responsible for their behavior because that's kind of what they thrive on. This idea they're not responsible. You're required to do whatever it is they want you to do. They're not responsible for their abusiveness, for instance.
Whether they're responsible or not, I mean, it's you can look upon them as just like a force of nature, like the earthquake or the bad weather or the disease or the the predatory tiger or whatever. Um, I mean, whether they're taking responsibility or not is irrelevant. I agree with that, but still, it's just this very unpleasant situation that you have to deal with, and you can deal with it to some degree in the same sense that you would deal with just inanimate nature causing the suffering,
Do you
and
deal
that's
with
just
people like this? Sorry. Do you deal with people in that way, like that, where like you act like they're not responsible for their behavior? Is that like a? Do you
I
ever?
do.
You do. Okay,
Yeah, so
interesting.
no.
this
I
is
mean,
interesting. Pano, it's really interesting you said that because that's exactly my angle on this topic. So just to bring it back to a more abstract kind of level, I thought the earthquake analogy was pretty interesting. So just aside from the semantics of just using words in general to try and summarize what things are, which is loaded with difficulty, obviously, I do agree with Pano that we just group things into things that we like and things that are, or things that are generally unpleasant and things that are good. Um, but yeah, I think this ties in like with most things that we talk about. Do you believe that humans are free agents? They have free will or not? And I think free will is an incoherent concept. So I think that evil, in some sense, is baked into the cake. What we're discussing as evil at the moment. And because people don't have free will, not in any meaningful sense, they are literally forces of nature in the same way that an earthquake is, or a volcano is, or a planet getting sucked into a black hole and killing all the life forms, or whatever it is. So yeah, I just don't see people as agents with any degree of free will. So any evil that occurs, yeah, I see it purely as people just being forces of nature in the same way. But I also just wanted to discuss something quickly as an aside. And I kind of like Schopenhauer's definition of evil, but I also was thinking the other day a little bit how Nietzsche kind of sees evil. And the way he saw things was that evil, like I guess many words that we use, can have pretty sneaky purposes. And what I mean by that is, and I guess what he meant by that, is that people can use words in a dishonest way to suit themselves. And evil, particularly lately, I'm sure everyone's noticed that people just throw around that term just willy nilly to suit their own moral outlook or their own moral claims about the way things are. And I find this word can be very destructive in that way. It can be destructive because it can prevent powerful people or good things from occurring depending on the moral system of the human that uses the word. And I think this is an important factor as well. So that's kind of just a few things that I wanted to bring up, particularly the free will thing, because I just don't think people have it. And I do see people as forces of nature. And that makes life much easier, actually, as a
Okay,
way of
so I
handling these things.
I want to push back. I want to push against that. So let's say you're let's say you're married to somebody, or let's say like this is a family member or something, somebody you can't easily get rid of. This person is a drug addict, and they come and they steal your money. You're living with that person, and they come and they steal your money, and use it for crack or whatever. Do you confront them?
Sure.
Okay, and then what
Because
what
they're
do
a
you say?
force of nature doesn't mean that you don't deal with it.
Right. So
That's not
you
what I'm
act like the
saying.
person is responsible. You say, "Why did you do that? Why are you taking my money?" Right? You're going to do something like this, right?
Yeah, but also I will not have the illusion that they're a free will and they're evil because of what they have free will and they're evil because of what they're doing. Their
Well, so for,
behavior's not contingent on the fact that they have free will and they're a free agent and they're evil. They're just a force of nature that's popped up and is doing something that I don't like, and I would deal with it thus. I do it every day at work. You can take
right.
it personally and think that this person has done something morally wrong and you can get angry at it, or you can just realize it is what it is. It's a phenomenon arising from the universe in some way, and you can deal with it that way as well. And they're two different ways of dealing with it.
Isn't anger helpful to some extent? Sorry. Uh-oh. Did we lose him?
Hmm? Oh,
We
we
lost
just
him.
get
Oh,
disconnected
no.
somehow. Oh, there you go. Oh,
Uh-oh.
there you go. There you
Sorry,
go.
guys.
You're
Yeah,
back.
yeah. I was in the middle of my rant. I kicked myself out. No free
Rage,
will there.
rage
I
quit.
wouldn't have done that if I had free will. But
Yes,
anyway,
I don't blame you. I'm not angry.
yeah.
But do you think anger is helpful sometimes if somebody is doing something harmful to you? Is it
Sure.
helpful to confront them
If
with anger
if
and
if
to like
you are in control of that anger, yeah.
right.
Oh, it makes me think of like Goenka. They would kind of jokingly say that sometimes like there would be a meditator, and they would be on this retreat, and this meditator kept getting up or something. So the guru or the teacher would go over there, yell at him like, "What the hell are you doing? Go sit down, you lazy whatever." And then they'd sit down and they end up doing really well because they got kind of disciplined. But it would be done in like a very kind of forceful, loud way. But inside, it's just like there's no malice or anger at that person. And I think that you can kind of do it like that. I mean, I think it's more like this is like a child, you know. I mean, you can start viewing people because I think just because people are grown doesn't really mean that they're not that they're actually fully developed to any degree. I mean, if you basically grant that everyone has like a divine spark and that everyone is basically, has God at their ultimate source or consciousness in God or somehow connected, so there's like an ultimate good at the source of everything, and that basically evil is basically the when this spark starts to have beliefs that what is bad is good and what is good is bad because it believes that like okay well if I kill all these people then things will be better because it's all their fault that I'm in XYZ situation. Then you end up getting people that do that, and I think it would be evil, and that is an evil state. That doesn't mean they're intrinsically evil though. And then you would just have to act accordingly, I think.
Yeah,
Right.
I
So
think.
this is the oh, go ahead. Sorry, Panya.
All right. Yeah, I think that is a main difference between just the blind force of nature, like an earthquake or a disease, and dealing with like a malevolent person who's motivated by hatred and desire to cause suffering. Is that the the evil person, you know, they do have volitions. They do have mental states. They are at least somewhat conscious, and so you can influence them in a way you couldn't influence the earthquake or a volcano or a bacterium. Like in Christianity, of course, you're supposed to return good for evil. You're not supposed to return evil for evil. And in Buddhism also, you don't necessarily have to return good for evil, but at least you return neutrality for evil. You don't just pump more evil into the equation and expect things to get better. It's like um, anger. From the Buddhist point of view, yeah, anger is, if it's genuine anger, it's always going to be more bad than good. It's always adding negativity and friction and so forth, more bad karma into the mix, which is going to be more conducive to things staying bad or even getting worse than getting better. Whereas I mean, if you can generate, like in Buddhism, like metta is the panacea, loving kindness. If you're able to return love for hate, I mean, it may require a saint to do it really well, but still, I mean, that is probably the best way of going about it, simply because you're like diluting down the malevolence and the hatred, and you're adding something positive into that. If you can muster that, and it may require a saint to really be good at it. That's what Buddhism is all about. I mean, you have to pretty much be perfect. It's like Groundhog Day. You have to get it perfect, or otherwise you just have to keep trying over and over again until you finally do get it perfect. So yeah, I mean, there's just so many stories in the Buddhist texts, especially like the story of Kantiwadi, who was this ascetic. He was the Buddha in a previous life, and he's at a park meditating, and this king, the king of Kalinga, also brings his harem to the same park, and the king falls asleep, and so the harem, they're just kind of wandering around, and they see this monk or ascetic meditating under a tree, and they're all gathered around him, and he starts teaching them Dhamma. And then this king wakes up from his nap and his harem is gone, and he's immediately pissed off because kings tend to kind of be that way. And he finds them all sitting around this ascetic, and he goes and demands, what are you talking about and everything. And he just the Buddha in the previous life says, I preach patience, Kanti, which is, forbearance or acceptance. And so the king says, all right, let's practice some of your forbearance. And he starts like cutting half parts of his body one by one with a sword, and the, the superhumanly saintly ascetic, he just says, yeah, I have to accept this too. Yeah, I have to accept this too. It's just he doesn't deviate, and then finally he dies, and of course he goes to heaven or whatever. But that's sort of like the Buddhist and to some degree Christian stereotype of how you deal with evil is just you don't respond, evil for evil. You try to keep it, as positive and non evil, your contribution to the situation as possible. And your actual actions are largely irrelevant. It's more the mental states that are being added to the situation.
Right, but most people wouldn't want to be chopped up. I mean, they're if you don't, I guess first of all, they wouldn't be able to even do that. I mean, that's a very high level, obviously. But also they wouldn't want that. They would want to fight back because they value their lives and their health and what they have in this life probably more than, I mean, they don't really believe maybe in the afterlife.
I mean, I would even think if you value yourself, like say you've done all this work for as a spiritual being to reach all these high states, and then someone's just going to kill you, so you can't teach. Probably defending yourself in some ways in a higher good than just letting them chop you up. I mean, if you actually have a way out. I mean,
Yeah.
obviously, I guess Socrates didn't really believe that. He drank the hemlock, and I mean, I don't know. It's kind of an interesting question to see. Okay, well, I mean, it makes me think too of like Nietzsche and the fact of like, you have the slave morality, which is basically like the more you can sacrifice yourself, the more noble you are. And then kind of like I can't remember what the other one. There was the contrast to that. It was like the slave morality, and then the other one was basically like wealthy morality or whatever, where it's success and succeeding is whatever is good for the most part. And that, I think for most people, kind of either consciously or unconsciously, really do view good and evil as one of those two. It's either a self-sacrificial thing, which you sacrifice so much of yourself that you're now, a saint and you're just dead, on a cross, or dead because someone chopped you up, and voila, you've proven your, you know, intense sainthood, or you're good because you've helped the most amount of people in some way. You've gotten a bunch of money and built a business, and you're, created a city, and you're a king that rules justly, and now you're, moral for that reason. Um, and it seems like for me, it's kind of uh, that whatever there's some sort of higher power, some sort of energy, higher intelligence that basically once you purify your own individual ego, where it's not about me, but you can basically channel through and whatever the greater good is, that there's basically an intuitive action that should be taken in every situation, and you start developing that more and more, and that's kind of more the goal of spiritual development.
So here's a question in in that respect. Do you need evil? So evil being corrosive or destructive forces, I think. That's how we're defining it here, I think. So do you need evil to have good? Do you need destruction to have construction? Is it necessary? Well, obviously it is if it's here, right? But what do you guys think about that? I mean, what are we going to do about it? How are we going to get rid of it? I don't think we can. Can we? I don't think so. I mean, I think that it's here. It's a physical reality of what is happening. So I'm not sure what you guys think about that.
I think it is something intrinsic to nature, in my 2 cents.
I don't think it's intrinsic to nature. I think it may be intrinsic to human psychology. I mean, in an objective universe, there is no good or evil, really. I mean, it's just energy and forces. I mean, they may be destructive or constructive and so forth. But I think it's really good and evil or psychological phenomena and not just objective realities out there in a physical world. So it's just the way we interpret things. I mean, some saint like Ramana Maharshi, he can just interpret everything as God. It's just all God. And then they're just there is no evil, but then in a way there is no good either. It's like what Alex was saying. It's or getting back to what I was saying earlier. It's like we just think in dualistically, and if you got rid of all the badness in the world somehow, goodness wouldn't have any meaning either. It would just be just sort of a neutral blandness in that regard. Or you get rid of all ugliness, and beauty really ceases to exist also. That sort of thing.
I mean, I feel like I thought a lot about this, and what you end up with is some sort of weird amoralistic position where it's just like there's no good, there's no evil, you can do whatever you want, and then a lot of people that end up going in that, especially from a non-dual stance, or at least they'll say it's non-dual, end up just being willing to abuse or do kind of like, I mean, because the fact is, if you're not fully purified, like your ego is not dissolved, you haven't done all the spiritual work necessary, then basically when you hit kind of this non-dual thing where there's no good, no evil, then it's like, okay, well then it doesn't matter what I do, and you're naturally kind of gravitate towards pleasure seeking. Like there has to be some sort of, I think, underlying principles or moral set. I think even the all the spiritual kind of traditions basically say, okay, well, start with morality, because if you start over here and say you're, you want to steal or take something that's not yours, and you're feeling some sort of tension or whatever from that, then that means that there's something to be worked on there. And it's an indicator of where the work is, because we're just so prone to not being able to see things as they are. I mean, would you agree with that?
Yeah, I think so to some degree.
Yeah. I mean, there's just not many people that I think actually, I mean, even the non-dual circles, a lot of it, I never even liked most of the non-dual dual circles, because it's kind of like, oh well, I know there's no good and evil, therefore I'm so transcendent and so much more spiritually evolved than everybody else, and you get kind of this like very subtly a lot of people that do Zen, even because Zen kind of definitely more emphasizes this non-dual moral aspect than most traditions. And
Yeah, but you've got unenlightened people trying to follow an enlightened philosophy, and they just sort of turn it unenlightened.
yeah, so I
Essentially.
mean, you have to define, I think, all this stuff as far as morality. Like the purpose of it is basically to know that okay, we're diluted to some degree. We're distorted with all these emotions and ideas that are not ultimately that are ultimately in service of our ego, and we can't really see it. I mean, I think one of the things about evil is you can't really see it, because as kind of Socrates kind of pointed out, people can only choose the good. So whatever they feel like is the highest good, they pretty much choose that and do that, whether that be murdering other people because they don't see any other way out, or like, I mean, I'm thinking more like a school shooting type of thing, where basically you're like, you know what, this existence is so futile and so painful that I'd rather just blow it all up, because screw whoever created this world. It's something like that, and getting that mindset. Um, so there's something to morality and non-duality, and there's a relationship there that I think is really necessary. You have to kind of like, I think, pin down both, and if you have one without the other, one, you're just kind of prone to just believe whatever your ego kind of tells you to. If you just go straight non-dual without having some sort of moral base to kind of you know allow you to see where your moral failings are, so that you can basically be purified and actually be a channel for good, you could say.
I think they believe
Yeah.
morality is an illusion, so that's why they get rid of it. Because there is no good or bad, so, what what are what is there to be concerned about?
Well, they
What is
obviously know there's
morality if there's
the
no good or bad?
I mean, if you grant that there's delusion, right? There's like reality, and there's like basically your perception from reality can basically be swayed, because even in the philosophy, you're trying to align with a idea that would be more aligned with truth, or how reality actually works. So I mean, they obviously have that, and I mean, I think it's just in terms of diluted versus not diluted versus like some sort of objective good and evil. It's still like a based off of mind states ultimately.
Wait, what? No, I mean, they don't believe there is any objective good or evil. They believe that everything is, I mean, it's like this, yeah, the non-dual idea that everything is neutral, I guess, or everything is good, but there isn't, the distinctions are themselves an illusion. So why should they bother, not stealing or not killing or raping or anything else? It doesn't actually matter.
But I'll say this: I think logically that may seem the case, but what I've noticed practically, which is different, is that when you are in that kind of mind where you don't think people have free will, you don't think they have agency, it actually allows you to be a lot more compassionate towards people, because in some sense you realize that you're all in this game together. A lot of people didn't have, just on a very simple level, the advantages that you have. Maybe they were brought up abused or something like that, and they're lashing out against the world. And what I've noticed is that rather than, oh, gee, there's no rules, I'm just going to go and become a psychopath, it's not the case. I've found that I've become a lot more compassionate towards people, a lot more understanding. And when people express anger or viciousness towards me, it doesn't impact me in the same way, because I'm not like I need to exert some moral punishment upon this person because they're a free agent or a homunculus in a bubble existing separate from the universe and they're responsible for everything they do. Just my practical experience has been completely different to that. My practical experience is that it's increased my ability to be compassionate towards people, even people on like a rational level that I despise. So various forms of leftists or communists or whatever you want to call it, even them, I understand that they're just a part of this overarching game or whatever you want to call it that's going on. And I just can't really remain angry at them for it. I can act appropriately, what I think is appropriate, but like that moral nastiness about like the same thing that's driving them does not drive me. Does that make sense? So I don't think that denial of some objective essence of good and evil means that then, okay, I'm going to throw everything away and just go and stab people in my part-time, like my spare time.
I mean, my main question is there a utility to it? I mean, is there a utility to morality, like a dualistic morality?
Sure.
As long as you're still in
so.
dualism, there is, yeah.
Yeah.
And then if you're more spiritually, let's say, evolved because you have kind of connected with a intuitive, you understand this intuitive higher knowledge, and you've done work to purify yourself so you can access it to some degree, and you're getting there. Does it become obsolete in a way? Like, is it more of a simplified basic version that people start out with, and it becomes obsolete as you evolve? Because this is kind of what I've been debating.
I think it's more so if you're mindful, and I don't know if I want to use the word non-dual, but if you're mindful and you notice things happening that are happening, including things that are happening in yourself, and you notice them on some level, on that level, they are things that are happening that are not contingent on what you think or do. They're just occurring. But on another level, it doesn't mean then that you're rationally going to behave in a way that's not you because you notice that there aren't any objective essences of good or evil. It's just things are occurring when you're mindful, right? And when you're mindful and you notice that, I guess what I'm getting at is that the practical outcome is that you're much calmer, you're much more accepting. And in a sense, I believe that you're more skillful at handling what's going on around you, whether that be some vagrant that's trying to rob you, or someone that's giving you a hard time in the shop, or some kind of negativity. I think the practical outcome of having that awareness is actually positive, not negative. So that's what I've noticed to be the case. Maybe people have noticed different things, but I think when you try to reason these things out and you try to rationally come to a moral conclusion about what's good or bad, and this is going to dictate what my behavior is, I think that's, yeah, sure, you can have moral codes and live by them, absolutely. But yeah, I guess I'm just talking on a more experiential level, things that I've noticed with mindfulness and meditation, and how that makes me view the phenomena that arise in the universe around me, including myself.
Do you think you could do that in an extreme situation when you were forced to kill one of those people, like at war, when you're going to war, like they murdered everyone you love, and now you have to go and like kill them and kill their family? Do you think you could do that without any hatred? You wouldn't have any hatred in your heart?
No, look, I'm not saying that, but if that occurred, that would still just be an occurrence.
Yeah, I understand. I understand. It's just
Yeah.
that in the more extreme situations, which is what I have in mind, it doesn't seem like virtually no one would be able to do that.
Yeah. Maybe not. Maybe not.
Well, I mean,
But then
it's like
would it be them doing it anyway?
Would it be
like
the, oh
in
yeah, I mean, I don't know.
Yeah.
Go ahead, Panya.
all
Yeah,
right,
sorry.
like in the military, like military codes of honor, for example, and also in martial arts. I mean, you are taught that if you start getting angry, you're going to be less effective as a fighter. You're going to be less
Mhm.
conscious. So you're better off just remaining as calm as you can and doing what needs to be done. And I'm reminded of this story. I've told it more than once about like the samurai code of honor. And back in the samurai days of Japan, there was this sword master who, because he was a sword master, he got challenged to duels a lot because anyone who can beat the sword master is going to become famous, you know. And so finally, he gets defeated and killed in a sword fight. And so his disciple, he decides, you know, it's a matter of honor that he has to avenge, you know, the killer of his master. So he seeks out this other samurai who killed his master, and he challenges him to a duel, and they're out there fighting, and the disciple of the killed sword master is winning, and he's got the enemy down on the ground. He's about ready to finish him off, and then the guy who killed his master just spits in his face in defiance. And then this young sword master, you know, who's avenging his master, he starts getting angry, and he's really gonna like really get him. And then he realizes, you know, this is I'm no longer motivated by duty and honor. You know, I'm just motivated by hate. So then he just like sheathes his sword and gets up and walks away. He won't kill him because it would be dishonorable to do it that way. And I mean, there's some of that in, you know, any kind of really like a good military code, maybe not in the modern, probably even in the modern, you know, American military. You know, if you're motivated by hate, even if you're trying to kill somebody, it's going to make you less effective. Your mind's going to be clouded. You're going to be less conscious. You're better off just staying as calm and as centered as you can, and just doing what has to be done, even if it's ruthless.
I
That's
would
interesting.
guess.
Sorry. Sorry.
Sorry. I would guess that most of the warriors, just people who went to war in recent times, were hated their enemies to some extent. Maybe they weren't, out of their minds with rage or anything. That's definitely not helpful. But they, I can't imagine they saw them as, beings who are not responsible for their actions. They're just doing annoying things. Like they probably saw them as evil, which is why they were willing to sacrifice themselves to destroy this horrible force.
Yeah, there was some of
I
that,
don't
like
know.
in World War II. You know,
Yeah, well, I think in any war, honestly. I mean, the
yeah,
war on
I suppose
terror,
so.
I mean, there's always the demonization of the enemy like that. That has to happen. It seems like you can't just see them, oh, this is a misguided person that's, doing their best, but they're foolish. Like that encourages compassion. And when you have compassion, you can't really kill, I don't think. You want to restrain maybe, or you want to do the least amount of damage. You're not gonna want to, bomb a city or even a military base. I don't know. I mean,
I mean, makes me think of the Bhagavad Gita because I feel like that was kind of one of the only examples I can think where they're actually at war and you're killing like even Krishna's army in the Bhagavad Gita. He's fighting against his own people. He's Krishna's fighting against like his cousins and a lot of his brothers and stuff. And he's basically like he wants to give up. I mean, that's the story of the Bhagavad Gita where he's literally facing all of his friends and family are going to try to kill him because they've been coerced by this evil um, emperor that took the throne unjustly, and so they're kind of having it out. And Krishna convinced Arjuna to go out there and basically fight for duty and to do it in a detached way. And I think that's what that whole story is so powerful because I think it takes it to the point. I mean, I think a lot of these moral questions do come down to kind of like life and death. As far as being, if you can view it from the perspective, okay, like if I had to kill somebody, it kind of seems like the ultimate sin to some degree. And then if that's kind of can be justified, then um, I don't know. It kind of I think puts all the moral questions into perspective to some degree is what the way that I look at it. And that's one big difference between Buddhism and Hinduism and why I kind of always thought I kind of lean more to the Hindu side than the Buddhist side because I always believed that if there was someone like, you're fighting for something that is right and will be good for others to come because you're doing it for the right reasons, basically, like in the sense of the Bhagavad Gita, then, you're better off fulfilling your duty versus just giving up and saying, okay, well, I don't want to fight. I don't want to be a bad person or hurt people. It would basically just be weakness and cowardice. In reality, if you have a duty because you are put in a certain position, you must fight for that position in order to help other people that'll come after you. And even if your own life is at risk, and there's this sense of, your dharma and playing that out. And so, I mean, even for me, I think I've accepted that my dharma to a pretty big degree is as a warrior. I think because I've always been in martial arts, and I just have a lot of strong warrior-esque energy. I think even one reason why I wanted to kind of create this podcast in order to kind of fight back against a lot of the woke culture stuff, which is a very warrior type of mindset versus a lot of other people I talk to are like, oh well, I don't like it either, but I'm just gonna like live my own life and bury my head in the sand. And I just never believed that was the right moral position to take. That if you saw something and you know that it's not good, then you have a moral obligation to kind of do something about it. But there are limits. I mean, I'm not just going around murdering politicians and stuff. I would never say that that would be a good thing, especially in a free society. Even though, I mean, if it's maybe in Myanmar or something, and it's like it's some sort of dictatorship, then maybe there is justification for that because there is no more free will. It's war fundamentally, and I could see that being that there is such a thing as a noble or holy war. I think is a possible phenomenon, even though it's abused, obviously. I mean, especially with a lot of the Islamic stuff, you can just call everything a holy war if you're spreading your own religion to some degree. But I think ultimately, from a moral perspective, there is something which there is a good, and if you're fighting for that good against evil, which wants to kill other people, you might have to also, you know, get your hands dirty, and there's nothing wrong with that.
Do you think war and warfare, though? I'm not against any of these things, by the way. So I'm not like some hippie. I also do martial arts, and I have no problem with these sorts of things. But warfare and domination is always morally ambiguous, isn't it? Like we use good and evil and all this stuff, but it's
Well, I
more
think
just a case of domination, really,
I mean, when you
isn't it?
say
I mean,
use, it assumes there is no good and evil. I mean, I think there is a good and evil. It's just very hard to see. I mean, I think a lot of things are just a lot of gray area. Like, say, with politics, maybe you have to, like, even to get in any position of power, maybe you have to bribe somebody or you have to, like, it's really messy. And I think a lot of people want a clean black and white thing to life, whether it be in power or power dynamics, especially when in a certain society. And that, you just trying to be some ultimate virtuistic kind of saintly person isn't necessarily and always in the highest good if you have a more nuanced understanding about how, say, politics and social interactions relate. That there is something like, even like, let's say you're you're conservative and you're trying to get into some sort of position within the government. So maybe you have to go and you have to actually kind of either suck up to or win over somebody else in politics and talk to them and be nice. And, by winning over their favor, then they start you having more influence and this and that. And it's like you could just look at it and say, well, it's all manipulation. It's all some sort of backwards, coercion, and you're just playing the same game everybody else is. And, I think a lot of people do maybe even get into politics for some sort of noble cause in the beginning and then just getting lost because it's easy to just say, I'm doing this for good reasons, right? Because, I mean, pretty much everybody believes that. But I mean, to the
yeah,
degree to which you're actually developed, you'll either actually be doing good or not. And
it's
it's
like,
not,
yeah,
people want things so clean cut. That's what bothers
yeah,
me.
yeah.
Like everyone
Well, that's
wants
what,
things so
yeah.
good and evil. It's not like that.
But and it ties back into what I was saying that Nietzsche said that people can use these terms as it suits them a little bit, and they drive for things by making these moral claims about someone else's position. And that's why I find it difficult ever to really just say there's some objective good or bad necessarily. But I don't disagree with trying to dominate a situation from a practical standpoint. If you think that what you want is what you think there should be. So, for example, we always hear, a liberal in your country, like we'll call a Donald Trump follower evil or bad or something like that. They're making moral claims about someone, right?
Mm-hmm.
We do the same thing about them. In some sense, they're not incorrect and we're not incorrect. They're just applying that word to express their moral outlook about the universe. But that's why I don't like. And as you made a good point about things just being black and white. People just want a black and white thing. I agree. But I don't think it's. I don't think it's correct. I think that yeah, the universe is just not that way. It's not the way it is. It's
Well,
all
I think
sorts
I
of
think
gray.
I think you almost have to grant that most people aren't that spiritually evolved, you know. And so if most people aren't that spiritually evolved, then there's almost a moral obligation for propaganda to some degree, you know, like, and I almost like in a propaganda sense, like even with teaching people for a certain set of morals, don't kill, don't steal, like, you know, kind of like the basic religious kind of tenets that these are actually really, in order to have a stable society, you have to have this at the foundation, where there has to be some sort of, and that's in some sense propaganda. It's like we're not telling you to think for yourself. It's just like this is bad, this is good. And I mean, there's probably exceptions, but you don't really get into it all that much. I mean, it's not really the point of it. Um, and I think that that in of itself, because of that, I mean, it's just so weird because I think that people are in different categories based off of the amount of abstract and spiritual development they've undergone. That the rules apply differently, which is kind of messed up to say because I think you can basically abuse anything, and I think it's the ability to abuse even sort of like a lot of the non-dual moral stances that make it so dangerous, but it doesn't make it false. That that's an actual reality, an objective reality that, um, or that's how objective reality works. And so, therefore, if you're aligned with that and working in that way, that you can do the most good. I mean, I also too think about a lot of the on the Hindu side. There's a lot of stories of gurus doing crazy things, like they'll break someone's arm or they'll like, you know, cause some sort of physical harm because there's some sort of karma that needs to be undone and this type of thing. So I think the problem is mostly that we aren't purified enough to be able to see the actual strands of karma that are causing any given thing. And then we also can't see it clearly enough to see what the solution is. So probably, you know, it's like since we're in some sort of state of delusion, all of us, then you're basically best off, um, I think, you know, basically fighting for what you think is right humbly. I mean, there's just an aspect of humility, I think, that has to be taken throughout the entire thing, because you have to understand I'm deeply fallen. I don't always know what's right, and I could be have a lot of conviction about this thing and be completely wrong. But simultaneously, if you don't pursue it, I don't think it's gets developed either. So you're kind of in a, you know, a little bit of a damned if you do, damned if you don't. And it's, if your intention is kind of, you know, pure, then I think that kind of carries you through to actually end up becoming more and more morally and ethically and spiritually developed.
Well, I would just point out that as a general rule, if there's a war, both sides consider themselves to be the good guys. It's just
You
the
know,
way
it
it
doesn't make
goes.
them both the good guys, though. I mean, you know, I mean, even then, I don't think, like, say the good guys. If you're, say, you are in a military, right? I mean, even if you're in like, let's say it's World War II and you're in the German military. I mean, if you actually are doing it because you know, defending your country, you believe that, you know, okay, well, Germany, we're in a war, we're under attack. I mean, I have an obligation to my country as a man to protect the people who live here, my wife and my children. So I'm going to go to war. I don't think that that soldier would be necessarily doing anything immoral, you know. And I think that's what makes it so complex because you have these layers. I think obviously from the perspective of maybe wanting to, you know, kill, like, in the grander scheme of things, I think that there's definitely evil on the side of Hitler and the Germans during that war, without a doubt. Um, but how do I say, like, but that doesn't make it a complete loss. Like, I think there is something to each individual within their individual situation having to make a choice. And if, you know, the better choice, if you were in Germany and you really did have a family and you're under attack and you're at war, then probably the best moral decision, even in that situation, would have been to join and fight and try to defend. And then, you know, you don't, you know, but if you're at a, say, like, say, a concentration camp and someone's telling you, okay, go kill all these people, then you have to make a moral decision at that point. Like, that's where it would really test your metal. But I think because in those situations, even most people would just fail. I don't even think the moral burden is as heavy as people want it to be or think it would be. There's actually quite a lighter karmic burden than people might think, um, because of the fact that it's, you know, like the same thing is like if someone's sawing your limbs off and you're angry and have pain. I mean, I don't think your moral burden, your karmic burden would be all that bad, because this is kind of like still within the normal range for most people, and that kind of reduces the karmic thing. Like, I think if you are extremely spiritually developed and then you steal from somebody for selfish purposes, it has a much more greater karmic impact. And I think that's why it's so hard to see. There's just so many factors.
Yeah, well, I would just observe that, like in Buddhism, especially, I think to some degree, in just about any kind of philosophical approach to spirituality, that it's, I mean, morals are psychological. I mean, if you believe that there's a God who just decrees you're not allowed to eat pork or something, then eating pork would be bad and wrong and morally unethical and so forth. But, like, from the Buddhist point of view, it's not what you do, it's your mental states while you're doing it that determine the ethical quality of the action. So you can do 2 people can do exactly the same action, one's motivated by anger and the other one is not, and then the person who's motivated by anger has done something unwholesome and the other one has not, even though outwardly it was exactly the same action.
But I feel
So
like
it's
you have
a
someone that's completely diluted, though. I mean, can't you? That's just diluted, and therefore they're not angry because they're like, "Oh well, I am so justified in my position for doing this act that even though it's say like you're actually harming other people and yourself, but you just don't see it. But yeah, your mental state is one of like almost exuberated like excitement at the fact that you have this position of moral authority. You see
Allahu
this in a lot of
Akbar.
the yeah, well, even I mean, just a lot of like the what is it called? Signaling. What is it called? Social.
Virtue
I forgot the
signaling?
word. Yeah, virtue signaling. Thanks. Yeah, I mean, you see it in virtue signaling all the time, where it's like, okay, well, what's the mental state? I mean, they're kind of happy that they get to show how moral or whatever. They're definitely not in an angry state or a sad state, or even, I mean, maybe more of a self-righteous state. But then it's like it's not just it's something more that there is like kind of like this objective way in which it's correct to act, and you're an objective like you're more diluted or less diluted, and karmically what'll come will be because of that. Um, yeah.
I'm not sure if you guys are disagreeing because Panya was saying that you have to have if you have two people and one of them has good intentions and the other one has bad intentions, even though they're doing the same act, the guy with the good intentions will do well karmically and the guy with the bad intentions will do badly. But you're thinking of a situation where somebody is like um self-aggrandizing in some way. So that's not really good intentions, like they're being arrogant, they're not being kind. Like let's say someone is being, I don't know, like it's hard to imagine an action where that's the same where one person has good intentions and the other has bad intentions. But
Well, I think a lot of the correcting thing is one of the situations. Like if you're correcting somebody else, right, where it's like you shouldn't be doing that. I mean,
oh
you
yeah,
know,
yeah,
that's a good one.
yeah, maybe something like that. Right, right, right.
Yeah, or
Uh,
the case of, I mean, as a monk who has walked through villages with my alms bowl, you've got some people that are just really happy to offer food, and then there's other people that will offer food only if the neighbors are watching, and then they just kind of like inwardly are grumbling that they have to give their food away just because the neighbors are watching, even though it's
Mm.
they're doing the exact same act. Still, one of them is much more karmically or ethically wholesome than the other.
but
Yeah, I
it's
guess for
still
me, sorry, go ahead.
but I see I kind of have an issue with all of this. Like this idea that it's only that intention that counts. Because it kind of encourages people to be ignorant of the world and their actions in it and the impact their actions have on like the wider world, maybe politically or whatever. This kind of got me when I was vegan and I had a lot of anger about the way animals were treated and whatnot. And I knew like, oh, wow, here I am generating anger. I'm hurting myself. It would be so much better if I didn't know about any of this. And I thought, well, that's a terrible religion that like encourages people to be ignorant of the harm they're doing. And you could use that with anything. It doesn't have to be veganism. I mean, politics or whatever, your BLM. Like, oh God, I'm surrounded by leftists and they all support BLM because they think it's
Hmm.
a good thing. They're completely ignorant, and they're not generating any kind of bad karma for themselves, but they're doing something that's harmful. So there's just something seriously wrong with that. I could never really make peace with it.
Hmm. That's a good point.
That's the difference between like the Western the Western approach and the Eastern approach. Like in Buddhism, it's like to just it's strange, but just to sit there and watch somebody drown, like a monk sits on the bank of a lake and watches a pretty girl drown just because it's against the rules for him to touch a girl by rescuing her. That he hasn't done anything wrong. Just going with this really hardcore, just heartless Buddhist ethics. You know,
It's life
doing
denying.
nothing is not doing anything wrong. Well, I mean, he's not denying anything. I mean, it's just his whole approach is just, you know, um, just kind of keeping his own nose clean. And I agree that I'd be willing to take the hit and break the rule just to save somebody. But still, from the Buddhist point of view, it's not necessarily doing anything wrong because I mean, samsara is always going to be messed up. I mean, it's just this endless sea of misery in this universe. Going with the samsaric approach to the universe, and so
See, sorry,
you
go
can
ahead.
sort of reduce it locally, but I mean, really, the main point is, I mean, if you want to purify yourself, I mean, that's how you help the world the best is by helping yourself. By helping yourself, you help others. By helping others, you help yourself. So purifying yourself just creates this little oasis of purity in the midst of samsara that can at least alleviate the suffering in your vicinity to some
Do
degree.
does it? Well, I mean, you're letting this girl drown just so that you don't break her rule. Does that really alleviate suffering? I don't know. It seems
Well,
like it
it's
creates a lot
it's
of suffering for her family and her
well, I
children
mean,
and
he's
all
not
these
causing
people.
it. I mean, it's just the whole Buddhist ethics are just radically different from Western utilitarian ethics, and it's just never the twain shall meet. It seems to me, it's if someone is really they've committed themselves to a Western utilitarian ethic where good is what causes the most happiness to just everybody in general and bad is what causes the most suffering to everybody in general, then yeah, you're going to be motivated by different motivations than just the whole idea like in Buddhism where your karma is your own and you got to just tend your own garden and get yourself pure because you're the only person you can really liberate. I mean, you
I
can
But
mean,
is
sort of indirectly by example help other people, but I
but
mean
is it good for society? Like, is that good for society? Sorry to interrupt. Is that good for
well,
society to
it's
like
sort
for
of like if you're in a nightmare or you're like let's just go with the nightmare example. It's like if you're in a nightmare, the best thing you can do is wake up from the nightmare because you can't really save all the other beings in the dream. Or what was the other example? I was like this classic Buddhist example of the burning house. I guess it's in a Mahayana text, like the Lotus Sutra or something. But if you're trapped in a burning house, the very first thing you got to do is find a way out. And then maybe after you found a way out, then you can come back in and help others get out. But just applying first aid to the burn victims in the burning house without even finding a way out yet is counterproductive in a way.
this is kind of making me realize my own ethics and where I'm coming from, actually, and what I believe. It's really illuminating. I just kind of realized that what I really believe is basically that morality and all these things, they're so complex because you have to basically be able to accurately judge where an individual is at on their spiritual journey. You have to accurately be able to see the objective situation, the culture. Like, there's just so many layers upon layers that I think play into any sort of decision karmically that I think it's almost impossible for us from a kind of ego, objective, logical perspective to be able to really fully parse it out. And that basically the best you can do is basically purify your own ego in order to intuitively know what is right. And it becomes, a position which isn't logical. It's a non, it's basically like, I always call it like translogical. It's something like above logic where it's intuitive because there's some sort of higher intelligence that's intrinsic in the universe, some sort of intrinsic good that underlies the universe. And that basically, to only the degree in which you're in touch with that and then channel that through in a, almost a not through reason, but through, um, well, basically spiritually developing yourself and purification of your mind, heart, and soul, I guess you could say. Only to that degree can you, you'll then know what to do and act because it's just too complex otherwise. And I think there's also utility though in just like parsing out how conversations about morals and thinking about it. I mean, it's not about negating the mind and just saying the mind's useless, but I do think that in order to really make any sort of true karmic moral decision, that it's just only to the degree in which you are in tune with whatever higher moral intelligence that is intrinsic or underlies the universe, and then to that degree you can make moral decisions, real moral decisions.
Just a point on the difference between the Eastern and the Western outlook. It's something I think about often. It's interesting, Pano, you were saying that Easterners tend to view reality as just samsara, something that is just, it's not going to change. It is what it is. There's always going to be evil. There's going to be good things that happen, whatever. But on the other hand, I think we as Westerners, we have this kind of, I guess we get it from Christianity, this progressive view of history where we're moving towards something that is going to be better for everyone. And we do that by making proactive moral decisions that we see as adding to the general good of the entire situation. I'm not sure how I feel about that outlook. Is it naive? I'm not sure. Have we achieved the things we've achieved because of that view? Will those achievements only last for a little while before they collapse into chaos? It's an interesting question. I often wonder, would we be better off maybe with a mix of the two, a kind of acknowledgement that things do collapse and change, but also trying to make the best decision for everyone. It's something I often think about, because in a lot of Eastern cultures, like they're pretty harsh, man. Like they don't look after one another necessarily. In some places, anyway, it can be a harsh place. But then again, is the Western outlook of this progression towards some sort of El Dorado, is that just fundamentally delusional? It's an interesting question, and how that places the individuals living in those systems and the decisions that they make and what they consider to be good or bad, or it's interesting to think about.
I think the striving towards the utilitarian goal of utopia is relatively recent. Like the ancient Greeks and Romans, they still had a relatively ruthless approach to existence. It's like a Roman, anyone who was captured by the enemy, they were just considered dead. You're not going to ransom him. You're not going to be, sending out missions to try to rescue the guy, that kind of thing. It's just, well, he's gone. And it's just, they just accepted death and misery as something to accept with some stoic fortitude rather than trying to cure it, which just in a lot of ways, it just winds up with like weak, flabby people that can't deal with unpleasantness.
Hmm.
So, I mean, to some degree, I mean, you can try to alleviate suffering. There's absolutely nothing wrong with that. But at the same time, there should also be sort of a push in the other direction of just training people to some degree that, suffering is inevitable. And when it comes your way, you should accept it with a certain amount of stoicism.
Sure. Yeah, I agree with that. Yeah.
And
it's also difficult to know. Sorry, just quickly on that point, it's difficult to know what you're doing is going to have a good outcome as well. It goes back to that thing.
I mean, the progressives definitely are trying to lead us into utopia, and it seems like they're leading us in the opposite direction if they are successful.
But even on that point, like even if you did something that was like not even progressive or whatever, but you say, I don't know, you saved that woman, right, instead of letting her drown. And then she had a child who turned out to be Adolf Hitler or something, and then went and massacred 6 million people or whatever. Like, you know what I mean? You never know what the consequences of what your good action is going to be. Like you'd like to think that overall they would lead to something better, but you're never quite sure, right? Like you can't say one way or another what's going to happen.
Yeah, you can be relatively sure of what's going on inside you. It's like, is this causing me to have, more negativity or less negativity? That you can have a fairly good handle on. But with regard to the, the just the, what's going to happen as a result of your action outside in the outside world. I mean, like Jesus of Nazareth was probably a very saintly person, but just consider all of the holy wars and persecutions and so forth that he inspired just through trying to bring about the kingdom of heaven.
Sure.
Mm.
And Julie, you're talking about being vegan. I'm just wondering if like an animal rights person got their wish and like all this farming was stopped and no one ate meat or whatever. And like basically all those species of animals would just almost cease to exist, right? In a way.
Well, that'll be
Or you,
fine. I
yeah,
mean, they're artifacts, and also they're bred to be like really
sure.
stupid. And I mean, why? That's fine. I mean, I would rather not exist than to have their lives. Would you rather
Yeah.
not exist than to be suffering from day one to death?
I don't know. Yeah, maybe on a factory farm. Yeah. But I
Yeah,
often wonder, like, on a regenerative farm or something like that, if they have a relatively good life, maybe it's
regenerative
worth
farm,
existing.
organic farm.
Yeah.
Yeah, maybe. Yeah, maybe. Yeah, yeah. If they lived a good life, yeah. I mean, I'm okay. I'm not actually vegan anymore, but
Yeah.
yeah, I'm okay with um killing animals for meat so long as they live a good life because they don't
Yeah.
really know they're gonna die anyway. So
And the
And
unintended
killed humanely.
consequence. Sorry, you go.
Oh, I just said just and killed humanely.
and killed
Right.
humanely. That's right. Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
The unintended consequence.
I was just thinking to replace the animal meat, you would need large scale crops that would kill large amounts
Yes.
of biomass. Again, these people that do this think that they're doing the right thing, right? Which is
Well,
maybe
no,
admirable or whatever. But the
no.
consequences are perhaps not. Just putting that out there. Yeah.
Well, no. Hold on a second. You have to feed those animals, and you need a lot of water for them. So you actually use a lot more biomass that way.
True. In a factory farm, yeah, sure. I acknowledge that. But there's ways to do it where you don't need to do it that way.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. That's
But
true.
anyway, I don't want to get into a discussion about veganism or not. I'm just saying that often when people have intentions that seem good, you just can never tell the causative outcome of what that is. So then, yeah, the good versus evil thing, it's difficult to pin down, isn't it?
Yeah,
I
there's a
think
lot
the
of different
animal
factors.
I think the animal thing is a good example of a gray area because you have a lot of even when the Hindu side or a lot of the religions, I mean, basically say, hey, don't eat meat, it's immoral. But I really think that a lot of this has to do whether it's immoral or moral depends on your level of consciousness. I think there's a stage um, where you basically become very emotionally sensitive to people or suffering of things, and so like okay, I don't want to hurt any animals, and therefore it's kind of an emotional thing. And then I think as you kind of move through that, there's kind of more, um, how to say, like you kind of accept the fact of life and pain, and that this is like nutrition, and that it actually helps you be. I mean, I think if meat didn't, I didn't feel like. I mean, how I feel about it is that it does make you stronger. I know that I'm stronger with it than without because I was basically raised vegetarian. Started eating meat when I was about 13, and basically, I mean, prior to that, I almost pretty much developed a hormone disorder, you know, and eating meat actually helped me a lot health wise. So I just always felt like it was kind of a it's one of those positions that I think it depends on your level of consciousness, what it is and why, and it's a good example of how I think it can vary based off of who you are.
Well, I mean, I think factory farming is pretty clearly bad. I don't know. It's very hard to defend factory farming. The more humane farming, I'm okay with.
Well, I think like I mean, like from how I think about it, I mean, if I go to the store right now and I can't afford the non-factory farmed meat, and if I eat this meat, I know I'm going to be healthier. My brain's going to function better. I'm going to have more muscle. I'm going to be leaner and whatever. I mean, I'll take the factory farmed meat, and I do
Yeah,
it all
that's
the time.
true.
So I think it isn't even in that case really black and white. I think it's yeah.
In a
Yeah,
way, you
I
could
see what you
even
mean.
go back then. You could go back to the person that created that type of farming who was looking at it. This is a good decision to produce as much food as we possibly can. And this is how we're going to do it because it's going to benefit humanity. that was his or her or whoever's a group of people's decision to do that. And they're probably doing it. There was a profit motive maybe as well.
Yeah.
But still, they probably would have done it to produce more food for more people. For them, that was a morally correct decision to make. Yeah. But the consequences, as we know in factory farming and other things, are disgraceful. But that came from someone trying to do good. So I guess I'm just trying to point out that you don't really know. And I can understand the radical Buddhist perspective of just taking a step back and just going, well, fuck, like I kind of don't know what's going to happen. Like I'm just going to live in a cave with a toga and sit down.
Well,
I get it.
I mean, it's humility. I think you have to have humility about the whole thing and how much we really know or can understand about it. And it's just about purification. And I think you get more self-righteous in like the positive way, where it's like because you are more connected with, call it God or divinity or whatever, you basically start to see things clearer and can know with more certainty. But, I think at the end of the day, you basically have to remain have an attitude of humility all the way through, because you just don't really know until you're kind of say fully liberated or something. I would think there's some endpoint, but I think humility really around the whole topic is really the right position.
Yep, for sure.
Anyone else want to add anything before we kind of wrap up here?
I suppose I could just add one more story that I've seen this in two different books. One was a book on emotional intelligence, and it's a firsthand account of a person who was there. And it was an American Aikido master. He had like a black belt in Aikido, and he's riding a train in Japan. And he's just, going from point A to point B. And then this guy in workman's clothes gets on, and he's stinking drunk, and he's just starts just terrorizing the people in the train. He's like, women are screaming, and he's, like throwing punches at people and just on a complete rampage. And after a couple minutes, this Aikido master, and Aikido is one of the least violent martial arts, supposedly. You're like incapacitating the opponent without hurting them any more than is necessary. So he starts slowly getting up. He's going to teach this ruffian a lesson, And right when he starts standing up, this little old Japanese man sitting, somewhere else on the train just calls out, "Hey, what you been drinking?" And he's calling the attention to this guy who's on the rampage, this drunk guy. And the guy just sort of barks back at him, "Sake." And then this little old man says, "Oh, I love sake. Sometimes my wife and I will get a bottle and we'll just sit out in the garden at sunset and watch the sun go down. It's very nice." And he just sort of distracts the guy and is just totally friendly, and it just diffuses the situation. And by the time this Aikido master gets to his stop, the drunk guy is like lying across some seats with his head in the old guy's lap, and he's crying, and he's saying he just got fired that day. He has to go home and tell his family, and he's so ashamed, And the little old man's just kind of running his fingers through the guy's hair, telling him it's all going to be okay, and the Aikido master realized that little old man was the true Aikido master, because he was able to sort of neutralize the enemy non-violently. I mean, it's sort of like an ideal feel-good kind of a story, but I mean, it is kind of an ideal that you can keep in mind sometimes, that really adding more hate or anger into the situation just feeds it and can make it worse. Whereas the ideal situation from probably Christian and Buddhist and other situations, other approaches also, is, you're just trying to add as little negativity as possible. Do what needs to be done. You may have to be ruthless or whatever, but still just do it without, adding more hate to the situation, because you're just adding more hate to the world by doing it.
It's interesting. That actually happened to me on the way back from Tibet on a train. There was a German guy who drank way too much baijiu, which is like a Chinese rice wine. It's really, really powerful. And he went on a rampage through the train. I've never seen anything like it. And he was like pushing people on the head as he walked past them and just screaming incoherent German at all these Chinese people. But there was no feel-good resolution, because at the end, the Chinese cops came out and just kicked the absolute bejesus out of him. It was pretty brutal. that neutralize the problem effectively. I can confirm that.
Yeah, that would be the more ordinary way
Yeah.
of resolving the situation, I think.